The deadliest alien beast chose one human cadet. The academy fell silent. The door was already sliding open before I had a chance to feel my legs go numb. There was no warning light, no 3-second countdown, no instructor voice saying, "Good luck, cadet." The timer ran on a fixed schedule, and it cared nothing about how ready you were. I stepped through because the alternative was standing there, while 200 alien eyes watched me freeze, and I decided months ago that I would never give them that. The smell hit me first. Sulfur and wet rot, and something beneath both of those that I had no word for. The kind of smell that lives in your throat long after you leave. The pen was dark, lit only by a strip of cold blue light near the floor, which I had read was deliberately set below the creature's visual and thermal comfort range. The researchers kept it that way to slow the animal's aggression cycle. Whether it actually worked was something the data files were careful not to confirm. My name is Lena Calloway. I was 19 years old when I walked into that pen, the only human cadet in my intake cohort at the Interstellar Defense and Xenobiology Academy, and I had been told, in various polite and not-so-polite ways, that I did not belong there. I heard the creature before I saw it, a low rhythmic pulse, deep enough that I did not hear it through my ears so much as through the floor and up through my boots and into my sternum, not breathing exactly, more like something vast settling its weight, recalibrating, measuring the air. I had read everything available on the Vorkai: 6 limbs, armored carapace rated biologically immune to directed energy discharge, no eyes. It hunted by infrared trace, by subsonic vibration, by the faint electromagnetic signature that living bodies produce. It was native to the sulfur jungles of a world so hostile that the first survey team lost 4 members just getting back to their shuttle. In 80 years at the academy, it had killed 3 cadets. It was not supposed to be used in standard gauntlet rotation. It was a display animal, a warning, a way of saying to every species that came through these halls, the galaxy contains things that will end you before you understand what is happening. Someone had made a scheduling error. My species code had not been flagged for the human exemption. My name went on the board next to Pen 7, and I did not request a correction. I will tell you exactly why, because it matters. It was not bravery. I want to be clear about that. I was terrified in a complete and total way that I have not experienced before or since. What kept me from requesting the exemption was something smaller and harder to name. It was the memory of a Drev cadet named Suhak sitting across from me at breakfast on my 3rd day and saying, with genuine apology in his translated voice, "I am sorry your species is still developing, perhaps in another generation." It was the Theric cadets who did not laugh out loud because their crystalline anatomy does not produce laughter, but who vibrated at a frequency that every other alien in the room recognized as amusement. It was 11 years of humanity being the newest, smallest, least regarded species in a civilization so old that some of its member races had achieved faster than light travel before Earth had invented written language. I did not request the correction because somewhere underneath the fear was something quieter and more stubborn. A door was open. I was going to walk through it. The first 10 seconds inside the pen were the longest of my life. I did not move. I had read enough to understand that movement created vibration, and vibration was what triggered the animal's attack reflex. I stood at the entry threshold and I breathed as slowly as I could manage, which was not very slowly because my heart was producing enough noise that I was honestly surprised the creature could not locate me by that alone. 15 seconds. The pulsing sound from the far end of the pen continued its slow rhythm. I could feel the heat now. The Vorkai's metabolism ran hot, a byproduct of the sulfur world biochemistry, and even from across the pen the warmth reached me like standing too close to a furnace with the door cracked open. 20 seconds. My hands started shaking. I let them shake. Tensing my muscles to stop the trembling would create micro-vibrations through my whole body, a signature more complex than simple standing stillness. I had read that too. I had read everything. I had spent 3 nights in the restricted xenobiology archive going through files I was technically not authorized to access, because humans are, it turns out, very good at accessing things they are not supposed to. 25 seconds. The pulsing stopped. In the sudden quiet, I heard something I did not expect. I heard myself. A sound I was not consciously making, somewhere between a hum and a vibration, rising from my throat or my chest. I could not tell which. Not words, not music. Just a low, involuntary oscillation that my body was producing entirely without my permission. I had never heard myself make this sound before. I have spoken to researchers about it since, and they tell me it is a documented but rare human stress response, a vestigial laryngeal vibration that activates under conditions of extreme acute fear. Most humans never experience it consciously. Many never produce it at all. I was producing it, Standing in the dark in a pen with the deadliest thing in the Academy's captive collection, my body was making a sound in a frequency range I could barely detect with my own hearing. The Vorkai heard it perfectly. I say heard. That is not quite the right word. The animal's sensory apparatus does not process sound the way mammalian hearing does. What it does is something closer to reading. It receives subsonic oscillations the way a musician reads sheet music, translating frequency and rhythm and amplitude into information about the source. Most prey animals produce chaotic, panicked vibrations under stress. Some predators produce tight, controlled warning pulses. What I was producing, by complete biological accident, was something in the precise frequency range that the Vorkai uses for intraspecies communication. Not the vocabulary, not the meaning, but the channel, the same bandwidth, the same wavelength. I did not know this. I was standing in the dark, shaking and hoping I would make it to 60 seconds without dying. My body was doing something ancient and automatic that my conscious mind had absolutely no access to. The creature moved. Not the explosive lunge described in the kill reports. Not the sideways assault pattern documented in the predation studies. It moved the way something moves when it is not certain. Carefully. Deliberately. Each of its 6 limbs placing down with a measured weight that was somehow more frightening than speed would have been. Because speed I understood. Speed meant attack, and this was something I had no file for. It crossed half the pen in what felt like a year. It stopped 3 feet in front of me. I could feel its breath, not warm air. The Vorkai does not breathe in the way I do. What I felt was the pressure displacement of its sonar pulse washing over my skin. The hairs on my arms stood up. The back of my neck went cold. My body understood at a level below language that something capable of ending me in under 2 seconds was close enough to touch. My throat kept making that sound. The creature lowered its head. Not slowly. Definitively. One deliberate motion, the armored front of its carapace angling toward the floor, the 6 limbs settling into a stance that the research files classified as Karath Nesh. I had read that phrase in the restricted archive. I had written it in my notes. The Drakesh 4 survey team had documented it once in wild footage, once in field observation, and described it as a posture of acknowledged dominance, offered by a Vorkai only to another Vorkai it had assessed as superior in a territorial encounter. It had been recorded in captivity exactly 0 times. The timer reached 60 seconds. The door behind me opened. I backed through it without turning around, keeping my eyes on the creature the entire time, and the Vorkai stayed exactly where it was, head lowered, motionless, as the door slid shut between us. I stood in the corridor for a moment. My legs were working. I was breathing. I was alive in a way that felt new, like living was something I had just learned to do. Above me, through the Illumina observation panels, 200 cadets from 47 species said absolutely nothing. The silence lasted a long time. The debriefs began within the hour and did not fully end for 3 days. Xenobiologists pulled me into separate sessions, reviewed the footage frame by frame, ran acoustic analysis on the pen's audio recording. A Velhan professor named Dr. Orath Vel, who had spent 40 years studying Vorkai behavior, and whose academic composure was visibly compromised, watched the playback 17 times before he said anything. When he spoke, his translator rendered it as, it recognized a competitor. Not prey, not an oddity, not a small strange creature from a young species that had stumbled into the wrong pen. A competitor, something the Vorkai's instinct structure had assessed, through the frequency of my involuntary stress vibration, as belonging to the same category as itself. Something the animal's ancient nervous system filed under, other apex. Dr. Orath Vel explained it to me with the patience of someone who had dedicated his life to understanding a species, and had just discovered the understanding had a gap in it. The Vorkai's sonar communication range operates in frequencies that almost no known species can produce organically. The human laryngeal stress vibration, rare and undocumented in most clinical literature, happens to fall within that range. Not perfectly, not fluently, but close enough that the animal's pattern recognition did not reject the signal. Close enough that something in 4 million years of Vorkai evolution opened a file it had never opened in the presence of another species. The file said, "This thing speaks the frequency of the deep dark. Respond accordingly." I asked Dr. Orath Vel what the animal would have done if I had moved. He considered the question for a moment longer than I was comfortable with. "I think," he said finally, "that the signal would have changed. Panic vibration is chaotic. The recognition would have broken. What happened after that I cannot say with confidence." He paused again. "It is perhaps fortunate that you are a person who stands still when afraid." I thought about that. I do not think of myself as someone who stands still when afraid. I think of myself as someone who stood still in that specific moment because I had read the correct files at the correct time and understood that moving would be worse. But maybe there is no difference between those two things. Suhak found me in the corridor outside the debrief room that evening. He sat beside me without asking, which is a very Drev thing to do. They are not a species that asks permission before offering presents. He told me that one of the Tharek cadets from my cohort, a cadet named Veth Kron who had vibrated with amusement in the mess hall during my first week, had sent a message to his family. Suhak had not meant to intercept it. Drev auditory range simply includes frequencies most species use for private transmission, and he had processed the message before he recognized what it was. Veth Kron had told his family, "There is a human cadet here." I thought I understood what that meant. I no longer think I did. I sat with that for a while. Outside the viewport beside us, the station's orbit had carried us past the terminator line of the planet below, and the night side spread out against the dark. City lights scattered across the surface like something alive. 11 years. That was how long humanity had been part of the Galactic Compact. 11 years since first contact, since the initial negotiations, since the careful diplomatic language and the probationary membership, and the gentle suggestions from elder species that we might want to observe for a few decades before committing to active participation. 11 years since Earth looked up at a civilization millions of years old and said, "Hello, we are here, we would like to be part of this, please." We had been laughed at, politely, mostly, with the kind of tolerance that gets extended to something young and harmless and not quite ready. And here we were, walking into pens we were not supposed to enter, humming in frequencies we did not know we could produce, making something ancient and armored and lethal lower its head. Not because we were stronger, not because we were smarter or faster or better equipped, because we were strange in ways we ourselves had not yet catalogued, because our bodies carried capacities shaped by millions of years of our own evolution on our own violent world, and we were only beginning to discover what those capacities looked like when introduced to the rest of the galaxy. We showed up. That was the thing. We kept showing up. I thought about every human who had been told to wait a generation and had not waited. Every cadet who had taken a posting others thought was too advanced. Every diplomat who had sat across from a species 10 times older and spoken without apology. Not because we knew we were ready. We almost never knew we were ready. We went anyway. 6 weeks later, during a joint training exercise with cadets from the Quelun and Tharek programs, I was partnered with Veth Kron for a navigation problem in the station's outer ring. We worked in silence for the first hour. The Tharek are not verbose under normal conditions, and I had stopped trying to make conversation with species who found it unnecessary. Near the end of the exercise, as we were logging our final coordinates, he produced a sound I did not have a translation for. His suit's translator took a moment longer than usual and then offered, "Sufficient." I looked at him. He did not look at me. Tharek do not make eye contact as a social gesture, but he said, through the translator, "The human cadet is sufficient." I understood this was the entire apology I was going to receive and possibly the highest compliment his species' vocabulary contained for someone outside their own kind. I said thank you. He vibrated once at a frequency the translator did not convert, which I chose to interpret as acknowledgement. 3 months after the gauntlet, the Academy updated its xenobiology curriculum. A new module appeared in the course catalog, listed under Advanced Xenobiology and First Contact Threat Assessment. The module was titled Terra-Specific Biological Anomalies and Their Implications for Cross-Species Interaction. The lead case study was Pen 7. There was a still image pulled from the pen's footage, the Vorkai with its head down, me standing in the dark, hands trembling at my sides, not knowing what I had done. The caption beneath the image was a direct quote from Dr. Orith Vell's published analysis. The subject produced an involuntary subsonic signal consistent with the Vorkai intraspecies dominance bandwidth. The animal responded with acknowledged deference. This interaction has no recorded precedent in 80 years of captive observation. He had added one line at the end of the analysis, outside the formal structure of the paper, in a section marked personal notation. We have perhaps not asked sufficient questions about what the human species carries inside it, that it has not yet had cause to show us. The commandant called me to her office the day the curriculum posted. She was a Velhan who had lived 4 centuries and had the eyes of something that had watched civilizations make their early mistakes and their late corrections, and she was not a creature who wasted warmth on gestures. She looked at me for a moment before she spoke. She said, "You are not the first human to surprise me, but I believe you may be the first to surprise the Vorkai." I asked what the Academy intended to do with what had happened. "Study it," she said, "as we study all things we do not yet understand." I nodded and started to stand, and she said one more thing. "Cadet Calloway." The exemption was available to you. I know, I said. She held my eyes for a moment with an expression I could not fully translate across the distance between our species. Then she said, yes, I suppose you do. I walked back out into the corridor of Orbital Station Karath 7, past the observation gallery, past the mess hall where I had eaten alone in my first week, past the assignment board where my name had appeared by accident next to a pen no one was supposed to enter. Humanity had been in the Galactic Compact for 11 years. We were young. We were new. We were behind in almost every measurable way. We carried gifts we had not inventoried yet, capabilities shaped by a world that had been trying to kill us since before we could walk upright, pressures that had built things into our biology that we ourselves did not fully understand. We were going to be fine. Not because the galaxy would be easy. It would not. Not because we would always know what we were doing. We almost certainly would not. But because somewhere in the long history of us, something had been built that stood still in the dark and hummed in a frequency it did not know it had, and made the deadliest thing in the room look up and decide that it was in the presence of something it had not yet learned to name. That was enough. For now, that was enough. We kept walking through doors. We kept showing up. The galaxy was still figuring out what to do with that.